Joining me now is George Conway III, contributing columnist to the Washington Post, a longtime conservative lawyer, and a contributor to the Federalist Society. George, thank you for being here tonight. Let's start with that very historic contempt vote. A lawyer for Mark Meadows issued a statement saying his client, quote, never stopped cooperating, as is widely reported. Rather, he has maintained consistently that as a former chief of staff, he cannot be compelled to appear for questioning and that he is a witness and is not licensed to waive executive privilege claimed by the former president. Meadows' failure to testify, just as he conveniently is revealing his book that's hitting store shelves right now. What does that say about him, in your opinion, George?
Well, I mean, he's got a problem. He very much fears what he'd have to testify to if he were, called to raise his right hand. He has to, if he's going to be asked, well, what did you do about all these texts? What did you do about these emails? People were pleading with you to talk to the president. And none of it's privileged, because the fact of the matter is none of this had anything to do with the president's official duties. This is why he was using, his personal email. This was all a political stunt, and frankly, it was a coup attempt. But it was all political activity designed to change the results of an election, either by hook or by crook, by use by physical threats, or by a vote. By having the vice president overturn it all, which he was refusing to do. So this is just but he has to testify to all of this, and he knows that. And, he has exposure. And his exposure could be criminal, could be legal, but it's also fear of Donald Trump.
So, George, I remember January 4th, 2021, just 2 days before the insurrection, you predicted that there was going to be a lot of drama, maybe even violence. Did you ever expect it to be as bad as it ended up being on January 6th? No. I mean, I was concerned. I mean, I felt that, I think a lot of people were overlooking the possibility that there would be violence, even though there had been a little bit of violence a few weeks before, in December, out by the Willard Hotel. The fact is that the attempts to overturn the election were so incompetent that I think people may have dismissed and overlooked the possibility that something more organized might happen, which is what happened on January 6th. I didn't think it would lead to, I couldn't imagine that the security on Capitol Hill would be such that people could be allowed to break into it. But the possibility of violence, I thought, was pretty clear, and I thought it was pretty clear from what the President Trump was tweeting that it's going to be wild on January 6th. Well, what was that about? And that was nothing but encouraging some of the wackos to show up and do what they ultimately did. And they knew. The people, the two things about these texts that came out yesterday that are quite remarkable is it gives the lie to two things. One is the notion that it wasn't serious. And secondly, the notion that it didn't have anything to do with what Donald Trump did. They knew he had fomented it, which is why they were trying to get him to unfoment it by pleading with Meadows to talk to Trump. And the big question is going to be, okay, well, during all that time, what happened? What happened? What took so many hours? During which the president was tweeting out at how we love you, and this is what happens when an election is stolen. What was he saying to these people, and what made him finally turn around and give that, do that recording at about 6 o'clock at night or whenever it was, where he said, when he finally told people to go home, even though he was telling them, he loved them. Well, what happened all that time? And that is the fascinating question that the January 6th committee is going to get to. So you were once a very hands-on supporter of the Republican Party until you dropped your party registration in 2018. You've actually opined about how
the GOP has become a personality cult. But if you look at Capitol Hill right now, many of the same GOP players are still there. They're the ones that have been there all along. Somebody like Mark Meadows. It also includes Jim Jordan, who can't seem to remember how many times he spoke with Trump on January 6th, or whether they even spoke before or after the insurrection. You actually heard his comments on the Hill tonight. You got to look at conspiracy peddler and insurrection cheerleader Paul Gosar. He's been a fixture in the House GOP caucus since 2010. This was the GOP, or is this still the GOP? Because, George, we're seeing here through the evidence, the calls were coming from inside the House for January 6th.
Absolutely. It is the current state of the GOP where they can't, not only are they not, they stopped calling out what happened on January 6th, even though a few of them, even McCarthy, said that the president was responsible. They stopped doing that out of fear of the base, out of fear of Trump. And now they've totally rewritten history, right? It's tourists. It wasn't that bad. And Trump is actually gone all the way back to where he started from on January 6th, saying that the real insurrection or the real coup was on November 3rd, and that these people were, they were vindicating the rights of, vindicating America. And it's just remarkable. And there's basically there are no voices in the Republican Party except for basically two that are calling this out, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger. And that's it. Even some of the ones who voted for Trump's impeachment are stunningly quiet.
So you just mentioned Liz Cheney. She dropped a bombshell with those January 6 correspondences between Meadows and folks trapped in the Capitol. Here's another clip of Liz Cheney describing some of the messages that Meadows received.
Mark, protesters are literally storming the Capitol, breaking windows on doors, rushing in. Is Trump going to say something? A fourth, there's an armed standoff at the House chamber door. And another from someone inside the Capitol.
So when 911 doesn't respond appropriately to calls, there are consequences. These were 911 calls of the highest order to the only responders who were able to act. If Meadows didn't try to help immediately, if the president didn't, what kind of accountability should there be for anybody from Trump all the way down?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think Liz Cheney was phrasing it pretty bluntly when she was asking at one point, I don't have the exact quote, did Donald Trump, by action or inaction, cause the interference with the proceedings before Congress? And she was tracking the language of a federal statute, a federal criminal statute, 18 U.S.C. 1512, I think C, which makes it illegal to interfere with or impede government activities such as proceedings of Congress. Now, the real question is, can Trump be hit for that by his inaction? And the answer is quite possibly yes, because normally, I mean, you're a criminal lawyer, you know about aiding and abetting. Aiding and abetting is a concept whereby if you help somebody break into the store by giving them the hammer with which they break the glass, they can be held liable to the same extent that the person who actually goes in the store and takes the merchandise.
That's right.
Well, Trump didn't quite do that, but there's also a related rule that says that if you have a duty to stop what's going on and you fail to do it with the requisite bad intention, you too can be held liable. And the example of that would be the security guard at the store who sees his friends breaking into the store and decides at that moment to go for a 4-hour coffee break. Well, that's what Donald Trump did. He took maybe he wasn't drinking coffee, he was just watching TV. He took the afternoon off. And his duty as president of the United States was to do something about that, particularly when he had encouraged them to go up onto the Hill and said that he would join them, in fact.
Yeah, and George, it is that idea, right, that it's the principal theory, right? If we all get together to go rob that bank, even though I'm not the one who actually pulls the trigger, we could all be responsible. While I do have you, I do want to talk about your involvement in the Federalist Society. 6 of the 9 sitting justices on the Supreme Court are current or former members, and the group provided the short list of judges that President Trump used to select his nominees. I want to play a little bit of sound of what those 3 nominees said during their confirmation hearings and get your reaction on the other side.
The Supreme Court of the United States has held in Roe versus Wade that a fetus is not a person for purposes of the 14th Amendment.
Do you accept that?
That's the law of the land. I accept the law of the land, Senator, yes.
It's settled as a precedent of the Supreme Court. The important things to keep in mind about Roe v. Wade is that it has been reaffirmed many times over the past 45 years.
Roe is not a super precedent because calls for its overruling have never ceased, but that doesn't mean that Roe should be overruled.
George, it looks as if, at least on the issue of abortion, that these 3 justices are now doing something entirely different now that they're sitting in positions of power in their lifetime appointments. Does the Federalist Society need to acknowledge that there's a certain maybe baked-in hypocrisy in selling these justices as one thing during confirmation hearings and then delivering another in real time?
Well, I'm gonna beg to differ on the role of the actual Federalist Society in. It wasn't a Federalist Society list of judges. It was a list prepared by a guy who was very closely associated with the Federalist Society, and the Federalist Society itself didn't prepare the list. The Federalist Society really doesn't take positions on this sort of thing. It provides a forum for people to discuss these sorts of things. So I don't know that the Federalist Society as such would be the right place to go to talk about, whether what these justices are going to do, which we really don't know, is consistent with, their confirmation testimony.
Great. Well, George, I appreciate your insight not only on that issue, but also concerning January 6th. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thanks for having me.